It remains a perplexing question as to why some spirits would want to hang around their final resting place. The cemeteries that Mark Twain famously called cities of the dead. However, some, like the Metairie in New Orleans, seem to provide an engaging environment which results in this remembrance garden housing quite a population of ghosts, many with intriguing origins. One such spirit is that of the cemetery's own founder, businessman Charles T. Howard, who also organised the Louisiana State Lottery Company in 1869. He ended up situated right in the epicentre of the cemetery, where people have claimed to hear his ghost from within his tomb. Disembodied voices and other noises have been heard to emanate from the 19th century memorial, which is so distinctly loud that visitors passing by stop to exchange worried looks. The larger-than-life character continues to create a ruckus from beyond the grave, perhaps continuing to hold what seems to have become an eternal grudge. Located on Metairie Road, the cemetery was established on the grounds of the former Metairie racecourse. The privately owned track had opened in 1838 and become the most popular horse racing track for people living throughout the southern area. The racetrack was owned by the Metairie Jockey Club, and Howard, who had made it big but was plagued by rumours of bribery and corruption, sought admission to the elite gathering. The club refused membership to the social climbing Howard, who deeply resented the snub. He cursed the racetrack and declared that he would bury them all, that he would one day buy out their racetrack and turn it into a cemetery. Howard's strategy was one of patience, whereby he would quietly purchase properties in order to eventually get even with groups that had excluded him. Locals dismissed the spat between Howard and the Metairie Jockey Club as just another tiff between Americans and members of the Creole community, as for years there had been some animosity between the two cultural groups. However, Howard simply bided his time, and when the opportunity arose, he carried out his threat, establishing the beautiful Metairie Cemetery on the site of the Metairie racecourse, and a new racecourse elsewhere. Of course, Howard himself was eventually buried in the cemetery on Central Avenue. Probably considered the most paranormally active site in Metairie is the so-called flaming tomb of a local madam by the name of Josie Arlington. Storyville was the official red light district of New Orleans for 20 years before the US Navy Department finally shut it down in 1917. One of its most famous operators was a woman originally born by the name of Mary Anna Dubler in 1864. Mary Anna, later Josie, was orphaned by the age of 4 and then resided in St. Elizabeth's Home run by the Sisters of Charity. She entered street work as a teenager and collaborated with the Philip Lebrano in establishing a bordello. That is until Lebrano finished off her brother Peter and was then kicked out by Josie. She then ditched her violent past and did well as the madam of the house, prohibiting virgins from starting work there and overcharging certain clients. After her brothel, the Arlington, burned down in 1905, Josie seemed to become obsessed with her own mortality. She purchased a burial plot amongst those of the upper class at Metairie Cemetery and then had an elaborate tomb constructed, spending thousands. The majestic mausoleum was graced with a womanly statue who turned her back on all the other tombs. The figure seems to seek entry through the bronze door and into the tomb itself, and is flanked by 2 flaming urns. Although her casket was moved elsewhere due to upkeep costs, Josie's restless spirit still seems to haunt the vicinity of her tomb. The streetlight across the road was reported as flashing red, and witnesses claimed that the matching urns were seen to be lit up with flames. Her mausoleum became known as the Flaming Tomb. Crowds began to gather almost nightly to watch, and sightseers claimed to see the sculpted figure crack from its rigid position and start to hammer angrily on the tomb's bronze door, demanding entry. Some speculated that perhaps the statue was possessed by the spirit of one of the virgins denied work at Josie's brothel. The nightly vigil of locals and tourists grew to such unmanageable numbers that Josie Arlington's body was yet again exhumed and moved to an unknown location, where she remains today, but the paranormal activity still continued. Gravediggers have witnessed the statue moving from its position, and visitors still report the urns glowing red with fire as Josie's spirit seems to continue haunting the site of her first tomb. Another spirit often seen is that of David Hennessy, who was a police chief during the late 19th century. Visitors have witnessed his apparition dressed in his police uniform and patrolling the grounds. Hennessy was the New Orleans police chief in the late 19th century, an era notorious for its corruption of police, politics, and civic administration. Unusually, Police Chief Hennessy was a good player, an honest cop, and relatively well liked within the city. However, disputes with the Italian mafia were occurring with increasing regularity, and Hennessy was at the point of a crackdown. When two rival mafia groups erupted into a full-blown battle on the streets of New Orleans, Hennessy ordered his officers to compile a keep watch list. It was inevitable that the majority of people named on the list were of Italian descent. The Italian community therefore labelled the list racist and discriminatory, and discontent boiled over to the point that Hennessy was plugged in front of his house soon after. Targeting Italians, the police department rounded up 19 whom they suspected of being involved. Ultimately, all men were acquitted after the prosecutor refused to accept the confession from one of the accused. Hennessy's assailants were never arrested, and, in response, an angry mob rallied together and swarmed the parish prison in Congo Square. The mob brutally dispatched 11 of the acquitted men in so-called vengeance, with the US government later forced to pay reparations to the Italian government because 3 of the slain suspects were Italian citizens. The emotions and brutality around the whole episode may be the reason that Hennessy's ghost still haunts Metairie Cemetery. Visitors to his 19th century tomb have reported seeing his apparition walk around the cemetery, always dressed in his police uniform. According to witness accounts, it seems as though Hennessy's spirit has stuck around the location in order to watch out for vandals and grave robbers desecrating any of the tombs or memorials. He remained a police chief to his dying day, and beyond as well, it seems. One monument in Metairie, which literally stands out from all the rest, seems to be another revenge build. The Moriarty Monument is an eye-watering 80 feet high, higher than any other monument in all of New Orleans, which contains 42 cemeteries. The unique structure has an intriguing backstory, having been commissioned by Daniel A. Moriarty, an Irish immigrant who settled in New Orleans in the mid-1800s. Owning only the shirt on his back, he soon met his future wife, Mary Farrell, and they established a successful real estate business together. However, despite becoming extremely wealthy, the Moriartys were still labelled poor immigrants by their peers. Like Howard, Moriarty's attempts to join the ranks of upper-class society in New Orleans met with a resounding snub, which he would never get over. When Mary passed in 1887, Moriarty saw an opportunity to provide his wife with one last grand send-off, while also finally lording it over the snobs who had excluded him. 8 years after Mary's demise, Moriarty finally completed the most awe-inspiring monument he could afford, outshining all the others in sheer height alone. The tomb is surrounded by 4 elegant statues representing faith, hope, charity, and memory, and rising high from the centre of the 4 figures is an 80-foot-tall granite column topped with a cross. When Daniel Moriarty passed in 1924, he was also interred next to his wife beneath the towering headstone, an eternal "up yours" gesture to the community who rejected them. According to Jared Schoen, Community Outreach Director for Metairie Cemetery, talking on ABC's WGNO, the very reason Daniel wanted their memorial to be the tallest was definitely so that his wife could look down and spurn every so-called blue blood in the cemetery forevermore. Some even believed that one of those serene sculpted faces was that of Mary.